it's not like this is some kind of uh, new topic to people. I don't think today's topic is new to anyone, because at least anyone who usually shows up here, because it's about your home or your house, the place that you live. And basically, it's taking a look at how you move around and live in the space that you call your house. Okay, so in this in some past conversations, we have talked about a home and how a home is different from a house and what makes a home. But today's conversation really is about the physical structure. Now, to be sure, the physical structure has a lot to do with who you are. As much as you may think you're making the house is always making you as well. What you have in the house and what you have in the house will determine lots of things. Like, for example, how you move in the house is determined by not only the things in the house, but the house itself. If you have, whether you have a family or whether you are there alone, that will impact how you think every day. For example, if you have lots of windows, you will think and move in the house different than if you have very few windows, right? If you have lots of furniture in your house, you will move different than if you have very little furniture in your house. What kind of lighting you have in your house, that will impact how you think every day. For example, if you use daylight bulbs versus warm light, that will change how you think, how you sleep, all of those things. Other things that are interesting is how warm or cold you are. All of those things will play into how you feel. And then based on how you feel, that's how you interact with other people. So, and then how you interact with those other people makes up kind of like who you are, all of those kind of things. So that's why I think like it's worthwhile to think about how you live in your house, and also what degree you have control over that. How do you manipulate it? What do you do? So I think the first thing we can start off with is how important you think or is let's say the ability to understand how the things in your house work. For example, most of us, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say all of us have electricity. Okay. So I'd like you guys to sort of give me some kind of feedback on how important do you think it is for you to know where things like the fuse box is, to change your light bulb, maybe to change a switch or an outlet or something like that. There are lots of things in your house, lots of appliances and stuff like that. For you, and this is not a value judgment because everybody has different things that they can do and different comfort levels with different things. But how important is it for you to know how your housework works? Okay. for, like whether it's the electricity, the water, the gas, um, lighting. How much time do you put into just understanding the space that you live in? Is that a thing for you? Anybody?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so talk a little bit about that, Betty. What is the talk a little bit about what kinds of things that you pay attention to in your house?
Well, I think I know where all of those things are, and I know how to go down and flip a breaker, and go through the routine of figuring out which one it is. And fortunately, my box in this house is pretty well marked, and I've had to do that.
Mm.
If I didn't know where it was or was afraid to go down in the basement, I'd, that would inconvenience me a lot. So I do know how to do those, and I've done a lot of those things. Um, I think I could actually change out a switch or an outlet. I'm sure I could, but I've never done it that I can remember, just because I have other options readily available. And I guess I'm a little afraid of electricity, and that's a gut level thing. It's not a brain thing. Um, but I have people who can do that with no danger. Uh, I know where the gas meter is, and where it comes into the house and what it goes to. Um, Things like that. I don't spend a lot of time at it, but I feel it's essential for me to know some basic things like that, just to feel safe here, feel somewhat competent. I don't particularly like working with things like those, and guess over my life I've been required to. So I kind of gave that up. When I managed the motel, I had a great maintenance man, and he usually took care of everything. I did have to learn how to get underneath the vanities in the rooms and lie on my back and unstop the stopper because he wasn't always there. So that's about all I need to say.
Well, I'm just curious, like when you mentioned that you said it wasn't a brain thing, the, the kind of apprehension about electricity. Can you talk a little bit about, like, did you have like experiences, or did you feel like, well, it's just kind of like a mystery. I don't really know how it operates. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of?
It may be deep rooted, and now that you asked about that, I'd forgotten. When I was I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and my family lived here in Aberdeen. We had an old 2-story house, and we had a large room upstairs, which was combination bedroom playroom. And I remember one time the curtain tie back, and they were plastic curtains, how people did when they were poor. But anyway, it had a tie back that came down, and I went over to put it up there, and it had been fastened with a thumbtack. And down alongside the window frame was where the electrical wires were. And I put the tack into the wire. It's very well, I bet that'll hold it. So I did get kind of a jolt and a big spark and a scare. And I don't know if I even told anybody, because I was very embarrassed about it. So maybe somewhere there that said, oh, you better be more careful about electricity.
Does that explain the color of your hair?
Some days, yeah, it comes back to haunt me. Yeah, but the other of it is just, I guess it's just I'm being kind of like a privileged old woman. I just don't feel like I need to start messing around with things like that now. I'd rather be painting or sewing or reading a book or cooking.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else have input on, like, how do you feel about knowing the things in your house, whether it's your water, your power, your sewage system, the things that make your house a modern house. Are you familiar with those things? And if not, why not? I mean, this is not accusatory. It's just understanding. Like Betty said, look, it's not my thing. That's a thing too. If so if you don't feel like doing it, that's perfect reason enough. But I'm just trying to see, how do people feel about, is it a thing for you? Do you think that you should know that, or do you know it? Anyone?
I will add, I spent several years living in a big old two-story building where I lived and worked that was almost entirely heated by wood stoves.
Mm.
And so I was comfortable with that. It was a lot of work, but at that time I had two sons who did most of the wood splitting and carrying, and the ashes got cleaned out. But I have lived in more primitive circumstances,
Mm.
and I value the experience.
Of living more primitively?
Yeah, and also there were comforts involved with that I found more comfortable than depending on the off and ons of electric heating and that kind of thing, or gas furnace.
Mhm. Good. Anyone else?
Good morning, Lawrence and folks.
Hey.
This is Jace.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'm just really happy to have electricity and have people that will come in and do stuff, because when I was young, real young, growing up, we didn't have electricity and we didn't have running water. We had outhouses, and I remember as a child, 10 or 11, I was young anyway, that, oh my gosh, we finally got a little pump in our house that we were staying in, and we could have running water in the house, and I didn't have to go and get water at the pump that was outside, and you had to walk a ways to do it. But that was so exciting. And my sister grew up the same way. But she lived in old Mexico near Tijuana, Rosarito Beach.
Yeah.
And where she lived, she was so happy when she finally got a linoleum on her kitchen floor. And oh, I was so excited for her. And she was just happy too. Oh my God, Kathy, I'm so happy for you that you finally have, you don't have just a dirt floor. And she was happy to have a roof over her head, just as I've always been happy to have a roof over my head. And that's the main thing, that I'm safe and I have from the elements, and I've been lucky that people have known how to fix things. My grandfather was a carpenter, so he made all our homes, and so I'm blessed in that way. But the thing is, you do what you have to do. If you have to walk and get water, you do it. But now that I'm old and I'm happy in my little trailer here, and I don't have to worry about, I do worry about the pipes freezing and all that in South Dakota, and try to keep them moving in the winter time. But the comforts of home are, for me, is just at least having a safe place where I can live and do my things, do my beading, and do my reading. I love to bead and read. So those are the two main things. And I just, but I think it's important that you know a little bit about, things in your house, where your fuse box is and where the water comes in, where you can turn it off under the sink, and, stuff like that. But I'm lucky that I'm just happy to have a roof over my head, and hope I can not have to worry about that. We had a trailer a few doors down day before yesterday that started on fire, and I was freaking out, And it was 2 a.m. and I'm standing out there watching and praying, saying, oh, please, I hope you get out. I hope there's no, no one was harmed. And, so that's the only thing that I kind of worry about. I don't want, anything to happen that I'll be in a position to be homeless. So that's, I'm talking about, just basic stuff here. I don't need a great big home or anything. I just want something that I feel safe in.
Place you can go to.
Right. Home.
That's
Yeah.
right. So, our kind of focus really is trying to understand, like, what kind of things do you know about your house, how it affects you, and things like that, how it affects your mood or whatever. And I think fundamental to all of that is like knowing, for example, like where your water comes from. My water, for example, comes from the Webb water system. So it comes from the Missouri River. Okay. And that system is, it's quite a ways, I'm quite a ways away from that. But then there was a company who came together to provide, let's say, clean drinking water to people, because a lot of people had wells, and a lot of people were actually getting sick from those wells. I mean, if you're slowly getting sick, you may not know that the water's making you sick, but if you walk outside and your dog's laying down dead beside the water bowl, then you have a sense like, okay, maybe that water isn't the best thing. But something that has a longer route than that and takes longer time, you may not know that. Let's say you knew it had iron in it, but you didn't know it had mercury, because mercury is not so easily detectable, or lead, and you may not know that those things not always, but often come in the same package. The same place the minerals leach out and makes your water brown might have mercury or lead in it, or other things too. So I'm just curious as to, how people feel about knowing where their electricity, their water, like, as far as I can tell, our electricity comes from Millbank. Okay, there's a power plant in Millbank. So one of the things I like to know is like, well, where's my power come from? And for me, it was just like a kind of a familiarity thing. It's like, well, this is my space. How much do I know about my space? I was fortunate to grow up in a household that thought that was important to know. But I noticed other people, like, they have different degrees of concern about that. So I'm trying to get from you guys, how do you think about knowing where your power, your lights, and those kind of things come from? How do you feel about that? Anybody?
I always have to speak. Oops, excuse me. Somebody else was speaking.
Kaylee?
I would just say, I like to know, of course, and I have taken tours of where our electricity comes from up in North Dakota, and I've seen the coal mines and the natural gas and the products that come from it. That was extremely interesting. And then the other thing I had done was go to the water place here in Sioux Falls and found that out. And yes, I think it is important, because if we don't know where it's coming from, how can we help solve the problem, and how we vote and so on and so forth, because we want a green community, so to speak.
I think Kylie was going to add something as well.
Yeah, I think just having a basic understanding and sometimes realizing the processes that are beyond us or the things that go on behind the scenes, the importance of knowing that they happen, even if you don't know all the steps or the full ins and outs. And then I grew up with a mom who grew up on a farm. And
Mm.
so growing up, she would be doing all this electrical work herself. She could fix cars herself. She could do siding and painting and roofing and, all those things. And so I had a different exposure and a different appreciation for the ability to know how to do things on your own. I got to watch firsthand somebody who really never hardly needed to call anybody because she could do this stuff, like wiring a house. My brother finished his basement last year, and who did he call? He called his mom to come and like help wire, finish his basement.
Mm.
And then knowing how stuff shuts off is great as far as like a fuse box or a breaker box, but you have to trust that it was wired and inspected correctly. And so always get the electrical tester that you can hold up to the outlet or the switch that you're working on, and that will actually tell you if there's power. So that's just a helpful hint.
Yeah. So, and those are very important things to know, Kai. What other kind of things did you learn from your mom about the space that you live in and taking care of the physical stuff of it?
She grew up and she didn't have much. And so she always had to work really hard and gave us a really good life. But she always said anything worth having is worth being proud of. And so part of the pride of owning a home for her was that she upkept it and made it nice, because growing up, she didn't have those types of things. And so even when I was young and we had a, mobile home with two small kids, that always stuck with me, as the pride that if you have something or are given something or fortunate enough to have a roof over your head, that you should respect the space and appreciate what you have, which means doing the maintenance and understanding how things work.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay. But I was just thinking of other things, like you mentioned wiring. How about like the plumbing stuff? Um, do you like fix your own, like if the toilet stops working, do you fix that yourself, or?
If it's easy enough to figure out, that stuff I usually try to get my husband to do, because that's not my like personal favorite. But if it's something easy, if a drain is clogged and you can disconnect, the drain and take the clog out, why bother to pay a service call? But if it's something beyond the scope, like there's a clog down, the line, I'd obviously call somebody. But if I can troubleshoot it myself, I'm probably going to.
Mhm. And do you try?
Yeah. And the internet's really great too. I mean, that didn't exist years ago and not the type of information. So I will look on the internet, watch YouTubes. I had even a car in for repair, and I had, Googled enough that I said, I'm pretty sure this is what it is. And sure enough, it was. But that's just I would have had no idea without, being able to Google that.
Mm, mm, mhm, mhm. Interesting. So anyone else have some experiences or experience in maintaining the basic functions in your house, or is that a thing for you, or why not? I do, and again, it's not to say, well, if you can't do it, something's wrong with you. Everybody has their own thing that they can do, but I'm just curious about it, and I, I will mention why. Okay, so I'm working with a group of people who are interested in universal housing. Okay, there's some people who are architects, engineers, and people who work with gerontology, extension agents, people like that. And we've been talking about universal housing. And so one of the questions that came up is like, well, are our houses built in such a way that people with, with just how well can we take care of the house? Because we're talking about housing that people, let's say, might buy when they are just starting a family, but they can live in that house until pretty much they die. Okay. So so that requires being familiar with the space. Okay. So the question always comes up is like, well, do people care, about that? Because will end up having to sell the idea to people. So I'm curious, about how people feel about, a house being, let's say, maintainable. So for example, we might be able to make it easier but if nobody cares about that, then we can make a house where you just call a technician. So I'm just looking for feedback on whether it's a thing or not.
I bought my house about 5 years ago, didn't think I ever would buy a house again. And I had never bought one by myself. And I'm a very reactive kind of emotional based person on a lot of things. And oh boy, I would have really been a mess if I had gone on what I thought I wanted when I saw. And I had been cautioned somewhere, and I heeded that caution to be sure and have a professional inspection done. And so it took me 3 inspections of houses I thought were possibilities in my price range, which was very low at that time, before I found this house. And now it's a nightmare that comes back once in a while. What if I had put my money into that place? The basement was full of plumbing nightmares and termites and, things that I didn't have the brains to, or the experience, to recognize. So that's my caution to anybody who's going to be buying a house, unless you are really qualified to examine all of those factors, pay the price of the inspection. And it's more like what Jace was talking, and Kylie too, things that came up make me remember I do have more capability and have done more of these kinds of things in my life than I had remembered or thought about. Yeah, I think that was it. Kylie triggered the thing about the inspection for me.
So Kylie mentioned that, she learned to do things on her own, or even maybe just get the confidence that you could even YouTube, looking at a YouTube video and thinking I can figure that out. That's a big mental and emotional step, I think, just to feel like, well, I can do that, So my question would be, where have you attained those ideas, or, like whether that you can or cannot do it? Where do you think those feelings/ideas came from? Anybody?
Feminism America shaped me a lot, unfortunately, but I'm glad I lived through Ms. Magazine and Gloria Steinem, because I used to just assume there were things that men did, and I didn't think about it. And I had brothers and a dad who was very capable. Mother was capable, but in the womanly things. So that took some soul searching when I decided to free myself from that mental bondage of my womanhood, restricting me. I mean, I'm not totally free of it, probably never will be. Parts of it are still quite nice. But that's where I started turning the corner back in the early 60s, when I had 2 small children and a husband I didn't want to keep very much longer.
Yeah, that can spark some ingenuity. Anyone else?
Um, Lawrence,
Mm,
and Kylie, I'm glad that you had a positive role model in your life that knew how to do those things. Um, I think that's part of it too. If you have others in your life that you see modeling these kinds of things, then that gives you an example of, well, if they can do it, I can do it too, kind of thing. And and I and I and I think being independent is something that you have to think about when you're designing your homes and all that, because I think that's kind of what you're talking about is, how dependent and how independent do you want to be?
mm,
And I think culture comes into play too as well in terms of architecture and how you look at your space. As Lakota people, we didn't have real big homes. Well, when we lived in the east around the Great Lakes area, we had bigger places, more substantial house, tipi tonkas, they called them. They were bigger houses and more, but then we moved to the plains, they were obviously the teepee, meaning a place to dwell. That's what it translates as. And
mm.
so the teepee then became our portable house where we couldn't acquire many things and didn't need, because you're moving and you're you can't have a whole lot of stuff that you're going to be dragging around from one place to another. And so you think about the things that are really important and necessary, and you think become very innovative as how you're going to make things and um, maintain things and keep things for storage and so forth. So I think necessity is the key here. What's important to you in your life? What do you how much stuff do you really need? And not, it assumes here when we're talking about using YouTube and all that, assumes that everybody has internet. Well, not everybody has internet. And so what happens, when you're designing a home, are you gonna make sure that the people that live in that house have access to cable or internet access so that they can access whatever they need to help them in their goals of staying alive and staying healthy and well in their home. And I really like that small house idea that I don't know what they call it. Those
Tiny
little
house.
houses. Huh?
The tiny house movement.
Yeah, I really like that because, but see, I'm the opposite. A lot of people don't like that because they want, more. I don't even know what square footage is. I couldn't even tell you how big a house is by the square feet. But I know that, like I don't need that whole bunch of space in my life, but that just means more work for me, I think. But but I think that when you're designing something and you think about the culture that you come from and what's important to you, what's valuable to you, and what are the necessities that you need to be happy and to live a safe and well life.
Jace, can you talk a little bit about the, let's say, some key features in a Lakota home, whether it's a teepee or a modern American culture type house? What would you think are the some key features, maintenance kind of features that people have to deal with? I mean, for example, I'm just go out on a limb and think if you have a teepee, being able to look at and inspect the poles is kind of a thing, you know. So, but correct me on that. I'm just putting it out there just to sort of prompt the discussion.
Well, certainly the construction you want to have, they have to be long enough and they have to be sturdy enough. And so you use certain type of, you know, uh, materials for that. Um, and it's really cool back in the day if you had women that were really good high tanners because then they had very strong, beautiful hides that they could put on their teepees. And nowadays, most of them are canvas, but the idea, what I would think they would, I'm thinking about a practical point of the air, if they're able to have enough, when you put the flaps up, then you can have light in there, and you can put the bottom up and you can bring light in, or you can winter them by putting other things, a teepee liner, and so more, it's more practical kind of stuff, making sure that you, when you set it up, that you have your your flaps so that you can move them so that they, when you have, because then you would have a fire in the middle, you know, you could have a fire in the middle to keep you warm, or not, you know, you could keep your fire outside and just cook outside, but a lot of us will make little fires in the middle now so that we can stay in them and be warm enough. And but you don't want smoke in there, you know, and because so you can breathe. And so I think that I'm into more rounded things. I get real nervous if I'm in square areas for too long. So I like to be able and if, since I'm in a square trailer now, inside I try to make things look more circular and make my world more circle and round versus square. And even how the furniture is set, or how the things that I have around me that I use are more circular in nature. And I don't know that, but that's my mindset. That's how I think versus squares. But I think that looking at more practical kind of stuff is, I think, is what will help people to feel comfortable in their space and and uh, and make it not so complicated that they can do things to check on their breaker boxes or whatever they have to do, or access to their water lines and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm a more practical kind of oriented person when it comes to living space and uh, and and knowing that if they don't have internet or YouTube, then they're not going to be able to access that kind of information. I
Well,
don't know if that's
that,
what you meant, but
yeah, it is. It is. One of the things that I think is important is, you know, because sometimes we can think of like the internet as, you know, like, was there life before internet kind of thing, but there was life before internet. And part of what we now do on the internet uh, is to contact other people. One thing the things like YouTube does is it allows us to access the information of other people without actually knowing them. That was a lot less possible before the internet. You know, it's like, you know, just to walk up to Joe Blow and say, hey, you ever heard of how to fix a faucet? Just to walk up to somebody on the street or just ask random people, can you help me fix my faucet? That was not a thing, at least not any time I can remember. Just, you know, I mean, if you had an uncle who was a plumber, yeah, you might call him. But just, you know, I mean, on something like YouTube, you're virtually asking people that not only do you not know, you will never know how to fix your toilet or your faucet or your electricity, you know. So it gives us access to people that we'll never know, but they're helping us out, you know. But before that, people actually had to get stuff done, and sometimes they just figured it out. Um, but what are some of the ways that people, you know, because some of you are almost as old as I am. So what are some of the ways that you found out how to do things in your house?
I actually did them because I had to.
Mm,
There was no other one to do it.
mm,
So at age 8 on,
mm,
I was running the house without electricity and running water.
mm,
And so you just did it. It wasn't strange. It wasn't different. It was something you did.
mm,
And there was not another resource. You just figured it out. And if it didn't work, it didn't work.
mm, mm.
One of the things I did find out that if you have something too long and it turns green, you didn't want to eat it. But the
Unless it was spinach.
basement was cold and it would keep it for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
So I learned a lot of those basics as I was growing up, and I just kept doing it.
Mm,
And I have a difficult time to this day when they would say, well, when people get older, especially older ladies, they have to have a man around that's going to be fixing them. And I thought, no, that's not really true,
mm, yeah, yeah.
because I was the one that was the fix-it one with my first marriage. And I didn't think anything about it. It was something you did. And then, of course, when you get to a problem that's very complex, then I had the reverse thought. Well, there's somebody that needs this job, and that's what they do. So I'm helping that person
Mm.
get a job.
Mm.
Have I loused up a few times? I don't know. Maybe a lot of people are perfect, but I'm sure as heck not. Anyway, what I'm just saying is the experiences that what gave it to me. And I wasn't afraid to ask if I was around a neighbor. I'm trying to work on this. Well, how could I get, I wasn't afraid to ask that of neighbors when I would see them. But being in a rural community, you didn't see them that often. But you do learn by experience. But that isn't true with everyone. And I loved, and not loved, but I enjoyed so much of the last speaker. And how do you pronounce her first name? Juicy? J-A-C.
Jace.
Jace.
JC.
Jake.
Oh, appreciate you had such interesting information, and I thought so much of that. I really respected it. And the major thing I came with what you were talking about, there is a difference on how we in this society, especially in the United States that have lived here, between needs and wants.
Mm.
How much do you truly need to survive and live? And how we have become so much more wanting things that you truly do not need to live. And that's the space. And I appreciated that so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot to be said. Again, in terms of what Jace was talking about, it's a lot to be said for when you have to carry everything that you own. You're not so interested in getting more stuff, because that can be a problem. I mean, you only want to have so many semis, going down the road. So, and if you have to actually carry it on your back, then maybe having more stuff is not a thing. But then the other thing is which brings us to another point, is choosing things that have multiple purposes and learning how to use a thing for many things. Okay, and in Spanish we have a word, mil uso, 1,000 uses, and sometimes we call people mil uso, meaning that person, he does all kinds of things. He's a plumber, he's a gardener, he knows, he may not be the best plumber, but he can do 80% of whatever you need, any plumbing you need. He may not be the best gardener, but he can grow 90% of anything you're going to eat or use for medicine, but he knows all these different things. Okay, so the sum total of his knowledge is more than most people. You can call them a synergist or something. But I think you get to that when you, let's say, for example, if you have knives, you know, and people find uses for knives, and finding the knife that can do many things and then learning how to use that knife for many things. Well, one, depending on what kind of things you need. Okay, for example, if you are a person who eats meat and vegetables, for example, you might find it useful to have a cleaver. Okay, something with some heft to it, and something holds a, you know, holds an edge for a long time. But if you're only doing vegetables, you may want something that's thinner and often not more than, let's say, 8 to 10 inches. Okay, and it doesn't have to have a wide um, blade, you know. So the question comes, how do you choose what things you need in your house when you're going to, let's say, have a small footprint? What things how do you decide which things you're going to have in your house? Anybody? I'm assuming that there'll be some kind of filtering process. You know, if you think, okay, I'm going to reduce my clutter, something I could always use. What are the things? How do you rank it? How do you decide which things are useful? We're kind of switching to appliances and tools in a house. Which things do you think are that you use most and therefore would keep?
When I was first setting up a household, I was only 17 years old, but I had a fair amount of kitchen experience. And our means, our income, whatever we had at our disposal, was meager. And so many of the choices were made based on that. Shopping secondhand, you know, friends and family gifted at wedding time and stuff like that. It's really evolved a lot, and evolution isn't always positive. So now, I mean, if I'm invited to a wedding, I'm just astonished at how many different gift lists they'll have out and how many things they have on their need list. So I guess that's a really individual thing, and of experience, I think then as I age, it's easier for me to realize there are a lot of things I don't need, don't use. I have the luxury of space, so I don't really have to get rid of things. But there are a lot of ways that people choose what they need or think they need.
What are some of those ways, Benny? What are some of the criteria?
Well, economics, I think, was where I started out. It used to be if you were a newlywed in my era, you didn't expect to have new things. You'd get the basic things like a bed and a stove and a table, or refrigerator, and some of those things came with your rental house. And now it seems like when a couple marries or moves in together, man, they're so elaborate with everything they require, a huge TV and maybe one in every room, and sets of pots and pans. And, it's just, my criteria, I almost don't have one anymore because I've lived so long that I know what I use and what I don't use. And some of it I've had for a long time. So that's not much help. But
Well, it is. It is. I think that adds a lot to the conversation, really. I want to switch a little bit again, and anytime if you think of something, if any of you think of something that you think, oh, I should have said that 20 minutes ago, please just kind of pop up, because the ideas don't always come right away, at least not for me, But in this idea of universal housing, one of the things that we're struggling with is, okay, we have a list of things that over time we have seen through, looking at, like how people get injured in their homes, what kind of things cause people to abandon their homes for, let's say, long-term care facilities and that kind of thing. Different people have looked at that different ways. And so there's a kind of preliminary list that those of us who are uninitiated have, but you might have your own list. If you were to say 3 features that would allow you to stay in your home a year, 2, 3 years longer, and this would apply to you too, Kylie, because I know that that you probably are like just maybe 18 or 19 now, but why don't like, what are some things that you would like to have in your house going forward? What are some features that you think would make it easier for you to live there and less prone to accidents?
I can speak right now personally, and
Mm.
I'm going to share with you before I begin. I have with me my son who has, in the last 2 years, had a leg amputated and is visiting, and I haven't seen him in 3 years.
Mm.
So the first thing I would say, access to your home. That's a big term, but into the bathrooms and so forth. And he does not have access to the bathroom here, but the doors are wide enough and he can come in through the doorways. So it is handicapped accessibility. The other thing I would say is the size does not need to be big, but it's got to be large enough that you can use walkers and things like that. And then not so big, but you need to have it big so that you can have a common area where you have cooking in your living quarters and where you're sleeping, close enough that and handy enough that you can get to it easily. So I've just basically said about accessibility, what it needs in it, I won't go into that. I haven't thought about that, but I wanted to give the accessibility definitely is. And maybe, the care of the outside, you would pay for it one way or the other, but that you would not personally be responsible for it.
Very interesting. And along with that accessibility, and of course, if you can't access your house, the rest is academic, isn't it? You're outside of it. But along with that idea, other than size, width of doorways and things like that, are there other things that you have identified that will help you in accessibility to getting into and around in your house? What are some features? Betty?
one of the best things about my house is that it has a washer and dryer actually in the kitchen. And it's just wonderful. I lived without my own laundry facilities for a few years. And that makes a big difference in my life. It's just a burden lifted. I can throw in a load of wash anytime and throw it in the dryer and it's right there. So that I think is very important. And if you're going to have like communal housing, it needs to be on the floor where the people live so they can get to it if they have to, use a cart or whatever. And the other thing is the I've stayed in some motels recently, more often than usual, and to have a toilet that is taller than what a kindergartner needs would be a real nice thing. And I do have that in my house.
Yeah. Or at least something that will tilt you forward so you can kind of get a start.
Sturdy grab bars and
Yeah.
yeah, and oh, and I have a beautiful accessible shower, which I just love. I nearly was killed falling out of my bathtub, so I got rid of that.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. Or you could have like a mattress on the outside, right outside the bathtub in case you fall.
Yeah, I gave up trampolining quite some time ago.
Yeah, yeah. How about ramps? Okay, and I mentioned this stuff because one of the objections that people have to installing these things is they say that real estate agents tell them that if you put those things in, it will lower the value of your house because people will think, oh, that's an old people's house, and we don't want that. And so therefore they won't buy it. Now, I don't think that pencils. That's just enough people's impression that real estate agents, it starts to become like the way they think. And so I think that they end up adding to that idea, whether it was an idea originally or not, and it becomes a truth because people believe it's a truth, But, little kids fall down for the same reason that old people fall down and hurt themselves, stairs, for example. So how about things like a ramp? Would that be interesting to you guys, or do you have a feeling one way or another? Anybody?
Could there be a ramp convertible, not have it when you buy it, but something that can be brought in?
Yeah, that you can put it on later, I mean,
That
for example, all you would have to do is add a little bit of length to it, and you can make a ramp in the same space pretty much that you have, especially if you double it. You can have a ramp that's reasonable in about the same space that you have stairs. Sometimes there are issues that have to be worked around, but just in concept, let's say the architect can figure out a way to get it there at the right incline so that it's not like a ski jump, or something like that. How would you feel about having that in your house? Let's say a ramp up to your front door or back door.
how would I feel about it?
Yeah, how would you feel
Well,
about
I'm
Well, yeah.
saying needs and wants.
Hmm.
I need it.
Hmm.
And so to heck with people think it looks bad. I mean, I'm sorry, but that would be what I would say.
Mhm. Mhm.
If you're building for a lot of people, is that what you're doing? I mean,
Yeah, no,
And
it's
that
for
would
you
make-
personally.
make,
I'm asking for you personally, not for
Oh,
everybody,
I wouldn't
just for
care.
you.
I wouldn't care,
Mhm.
you know.
Would you pay for it? Would you pay for somebody to put one in?
Well, of course,
Yeah.
if
Okay.
you need it.
Yeah, but I'm talking about, so I'm looking to have it personalized, because we can talk in the hypothetical, but whatever we say here is just, it's just cocktail talk anyway, unless you make it a thing, So I'm just thinking it's like, for me, I plan to get one, I didn't really think about it until I started working with this particular committee, but that's one of the things I plan to do if I can find a contractor. That's a whole other discussion on another day. But if I can find a reliable contractor, that's one of the things I want to have done is a ramp put up to my door. So that I can crawl up the ramp at the right time, or skate down it. One of the two. Well, it looks like, unfortunately, speaking of ramps, we're just getting ramped up in this conversation, but now our time is up. But I hope you will think about these kinds of things, like look around your house and just, I mean, it's not like it's a low stress. I hope it's a low stress thing. You look around your house and say, how can I make my house more convenient for me? And most of us are getting older. There's probably very few of us who are going backwards. Some who are like getting older faster and slower, but we're all getting older. So at some point, if we're lucky enough, we'll live long enough that these features will become very important to us. So as you live in your house, whether it's like your cooking appliances or your like access to your house, lighting, where the light switches are, just in the terms of efficiency or your comfort or whatever is important to you, are you personalizing your house? Are you making your house the place that's personal to you, that fits your practical as well as your emotional needs? So I'll leave you with that, and hope you'll fill out that form that Ryan always leaves for us. But thank you everybody for showing up, and we'll see you next week, same time, same station.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Okay, bye.
Have a great day, folks.